Houston and Harris County leads the state in homicide rates for domestic violence, and we appreciate the mayor very much for leading this effort and for recognizing the urgency of this issue. Mayor.
Thanks, Emily. Look, I can't tell you just how important this is, and we have to continue to speak out until action is taken, definitive action. And so let me also just say to the Houston Area Women's Center is one of the leading organizations standing every day with survivors of sexual and domestic violence in the entire country. And let me thank Emily, let me thank you all for what you all continue to do and what you've done over decades. I am humbled to stand here with some of the strong women who will share their experiences in a few minutes. And I want to acknowledge again Chief Acevedo, Sheriff Gonzalez, the Mayor Pro Tem, Ellen Cohen, who led this organization for almost 2 decades before entering public service, as well as members of the Houston Area Women's Center who are supporting this very important cause. As mayor, my #1 priority is public safety. And when important public safety issues are debated at the national level, such as universal background checks for all gun sales, and I've lent my name to those demanding action. And today we add Houston's name to the chorus, calling on the United States Senate to pass the Violence Against Women Act, introduced by Senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine of Virginia. This bill, which would reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act through 2024, provides essential protections and resources to survivors of domestic violence and sexual abuse. The legislation preserves advancements made in previous reauthorizations and includes several additional improvements to the current law. Nearly half of all female homicide victims are killed by a current or former dating partner, according to a 2017 study by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And Black women in the United States are twice as likely as white women to be fatally shot by an intimate partner, and young Black women are almost 3 times more likely to be shot and killed. Those horrifying acts against victims is why the U.S. Senate must, and let me underscore, must act and cannot wait. This isn't a political issue. This bill is needed to protect survivors, prevent more acts of violence against women, and make sure perpetrators are persecuted. And let me just say prosecuted. And let me just say it's not about being a Democrat or being a Republican. Because quite frankly, when it comes to domestic abuse and violence, no one is asking about your party affiliation. That is not the issue, and neither should it become the issue in the Senate. Let me now turn to Chief Acevedo to offer remarks on how sexual and domestic violence impacts us here in Houston and affects HPD's work. Chief Acevedo.
Thank you, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you both for your leadership, and Sheriff Gonzalez, thank you for being just a great partner and a leader in our community, and obviously Emily and everybody here at the Houston Area Women's Shelter. You do phenomenal work, and what you do is you help restore lives and you help bring families that are at risk of serious injury, at risk of death, and obviously subject to abuse out of these environments, and you turn victims into survivors. And so for that, I want to say to HAWC, and I love the acronym HAWC because you're tough, and you're tough in terms of fighting for our families. And I think that the way that we treat women, children, and the elderly says a lot about society. Right now, what we know is that the Congress, specifically the Senate, has had VAWA, the Violence Against Women's Act legislation that has passed the House, just like H.R. 18 and some of the gun violence prevention strategies that we know that gun violence impacts families daily in this city, state, and nation is sitting there. And so today I'm proud to stand with my Mayor Pro Tem, with our Sheriff, and with our Houston Police family and HAWC family to say enough is enough. We've had 40 homicides as of the end of November in this city, 40 out of 253 that were domestic violence related. We have thousands of women, children, and families that are treated and serviced and helped right here at the Human Areas Women's Shelter. And the one thing that we know is that the failure to pass is a disservice to women, it's a disservice to children, and it's a disservice to our communities, and it's time to act. If there's something, and what I love about this mayor when he was in the legislature and our council members, is that when there's differences between what the House wants to pass and the Senate wants to pass. It's time to get a conference committee in a room and don't come out of a room until you work out those differences, because every day that passes, we have women that are being victimized, children that are being victimized, murdered and abused. They're not getting the protection and the service that they deserve. So it's time for the Senate to act, for the Congress to act, and ultimately for the President to sign VAWA. Lives are literally sitting on balance, in the balance. So with that, I wanted to say I look forward to any questions, and I'll turn it over to I think the best sheriff that I've ever worked with, Sheriff Gonzalez. Thanks, Sheriff.
Thank you. Mayor Turner, good to see you here. Thank you for your leadership and support for this. The shout out as well to our chief, who in my opinion is the best chief in America, and I consider him a friend and a mentor. Chief Dobbins, good to see you here. Mayor Pro Tem, it's always great to see you. We serve together on City Council. And Emily, thank you for your leadership of this wonderful organization, of which I've been proud to serve as a board member as well. So I know it well, and I know the work that they stand for and how they deliver for the community. To me, this is a very critical and important issue. Our first responders, both from HPD and Harris County and others, respond to these calls on a daily basis. Sometimes we get there and we see the physical marks. Sometimes it's beyond that. It could be emotional, there's mental. There's so many abuse that extends beyond just what we see. This is also an issue that impacts more than families. Beyond just the impact on the family, it impacts the entire community. It impacts all of us as well. And it's something that's critically important. I think Chief Acevedo said it well, and so did the mayor. This is not a political issue. This had strong bipartisan support when it was first enacted in 1994. Since then, it's been reauthorized 3 additional times, each time with additional improvements as we learn more about the critical nature about this issue. And that's what's at stake now. We know now that it extends just beyond adult individuals. This extends to young people as well, to make sure that there's protection, because we're seeing the onset of domestic violence as early as 15 years or even younger at times. So it needs to change. We need to make sure that we close that boyfriend loophole, that we get that additional training for law enforcement, that we continue to collect the data to educate us so we can make sure that we're being data driven. All these are critical points. And as we heard, this should not be a bipartisan issue. It should just come together to say that we stand in support of women all over. Every day that this is not authorized, it gives the notion that there's a passive acceptance that violence against women is acceptable. It is not. It is a crime. We all stand together to make sure that we stop this, and we need to make sure that we're protecting everyone in the community, because everyone is vulnerable. Many of our homicides in unincorporated Harris County have a domestic violence nexus. Just yesterday, our deputies, our investigators responded to a murder-suicide. Mr. Schneider, 60 years of age, called to report that he had murdered his wife a few days before, and by the time the police would arrive, he was going to kill himself, and indeed he did. When they arrived, they found 2 bodies there. We're impacted by the trauma of seeing that day in and day out. And again, it doesn't only impact our senior community, it all impacts young people. We see, from my experience, we see this early onset in grade school, in public schools, as well as all the way through the college years as well. And especially when they're vulnerable, when they've yet to really understand what a healthy relationship is and what signs to look for, they end up getting caught in that cycle of violence. So we need to stand up and say, let's work together, let's get this done, let's not waste any more time. So I thank all the advocates here. Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership on this and so many issues. Mayor Pro Tem, no one knows these issues better than you. We sat next to each other on City Council, and I know her strong advocacy for a number of issues, but including women's issues, and knowing this issue very personally through her leadership here at the Houston Area Women's Center for many years. So I stand in support. Briefly in Spanish, estamos aquí para apoyar el acto de violencia contra las mujeres. Es una póliza nacional, es una de las más populares. Fue puesto entre ley en 1994 y desde entonces 3 veces más se ha aprobado esta ley, cada vez con mejoramientos a esa ley. Y estamos aquí a decir que se ha parado un pauso en esta legislatura. Entonces tenemos que estar seguros de que el gobierno federal esté actuando, porque cada día que no lo hacen están dañando a mujeres que pueden ser víctimas de violencia doméstica. Tenemos que mejorar esta ley y que pase esta ley inmediatamente porque las vidas de mujeres están en peligro. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks all. So, yeah, with that said, I want to again introduce my former colleague, a leader in so many different issues. I'm so proud of her service. I had the privilege of learning and working with her on the city council dais, and just did so many amazing work surrounding sexual assault survivors, domestic violence, and many, many other wonderful pieces of work on city council, too many to name. And so with that said, please help me welcome our Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I feel like I should say thank you and sit down because thank you, Mayor. It always touches me to be back here, and I was talking to some people before, Mayor. I started right here as the CEO and then worked under 10 board chairs going down there. So it was, as you say, close to 2 decades. The National Violence Against Women Act has deep personal significance for me. Its passage in 1994 created the National Advisory Council on Violence Against Women. And I was deeply honored to receive a call while I was driving from Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee asking me if I would be willing to have my name submitted to serve on the National Violence Against Women Advisory Committee. So I wanted to appear very cool, and I said, well, thank you very much. I am honored, and yes, I accept. And then we hung up, and I almost drove off the road, as that was pretty exciting. She nominated me. President Clinton put my name forward. I was accepted, and I worked closely with Attorney General then Janet Reno, and then U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, and now Congresswoman Donna Shalala. And we worked to strategize for the implementation of the Violence Against Women Act. My time as the CEO of the Houston Area Women's Center and serving on the National Advisory Council on Violence Against Women has shown me just how critical this legislation is. VAWA means life for thousands of women across the country, and a failure to authorize VAWA means death for them. The House has already, as was mentioned, authorized VAWA, but the Republican leadership in the Senate have refused to do so yet. But this topic, as you all mentioned, is too serious to be caught up in partisan politics and bickering. Domestic violence knows no party ID. Both Republicans, as Mayor, as you said, Republicans and Democrats abuse and are abused. Similarly, domestic violence and sexual assault know no religion, color, race, or socioeconomics. Perpetrators can be highly educated or never having graduated from high school. Lawyers or laborers, believers or agnostics, male or female, teetotalers or alcoholics. What they have in common is their overriding desire for power and control. The critical protections VAWA provides take some of the power away from abusers. The Senate needs to act immediately to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. And I would urge all of you here today, media, active members of the Houston Area Women's Center, my colleagues up here, talk to the senators from Texas. Ask them how they plan to vote. Ask them if they're not voting for VAWA reauthorization, why not? Be at their meetings, challenge them. And finally, I feel like I'm in school again, but I brought a little show and tell. And over on that table, Bill, I have, the Mayor, if you take a quick look at that, you'll see a very, very, very young person in the middle between Donna Shalala and Janet Reno.
That's a beautiful.
And anyway, that was taken when I was put on the VAWA Violence Against Women Advisory Committee. And then there's a letter over there, that's fine, just leave it, which thanks me for my service in 2001. So it's a little bit like show and tell, but I was so proud. One of the proudest things I've done alongside being CEO of the Houston Area Women's Center.
So if you you'll humor me, I want to just bring home a little bit what's at stake right here at the Houston Area Women's Center if this bill is not reauthorized. I think it's important that we have a grounded understanding of what the implication could be if we are not able to get this bill passed. And I want you to think about why what I'm talking about is not partisan. Last year, we received almost $700,000 through different streams that relate to VAWA. And we were able to fund 18 staff members and up to 12 of other staff partly. VAWA, those positions were our hotline positions, our counseling positions, and through those positions, we served thousands of clients and were able to reach through outreach and prevention efforts thousands and thousands more. If we aren't able to get this VAWA funding, we will not be able to reach those people. I don't know if you saw the article yesterday in the newspaper about a client of ours that we had the privilege of serving, and it was because of her courage that she was able to reach out and get out of a very dangerous situation. But we were also able to companion her in her journey to a self-sufficient life, independent and free from violence. It's that kind of transformation that is made possible by VAWA. And I also want you to know that it's the confidentiality that our clients rely on us for that is protected in VAWA. So it's not just the funding, it's the confidentiality. And confidentiality is not a partisan issue. If people who called us didn't know or trust that we would keep their stories secret and frankly sacred, that their secrets were sacred to us, then they might not call and they might not reach out for the life-saving services that we provide. That's not partisan, that's common sense, and it's incredibly important that we make that case actively right now. It's hanging in the balance, and I appreciate you letting me take the time to detail why this is so important right here and now for the people that we are answering their calls right around the corner. So thank you for letting us have this right here. I want you to know that we are going to fight for this bill to get it passed. And 501c3s are allowed to do a little bit of lobbying, so this counts. We are actively lobbying to get this bill passed. Life-saving. And to be clear, we don't want to roll back any of the protections in the current law. We also want to input new protections. As somebody said, you're arguing with modernity if you don't understand that boyfriends having access to guns will result in murders. It just will. Just because you're not married doesn't mean that that person isn't going to stalk you, hit you, abuse you, or shoot you. We see it every day. This bill needs to be passed. So I think we have some survivors who are going to be available for questions or who are going to come and say, what's the plan?
If you feel strong and courageous enough, I encourage you to stand up there and share your story.
Thank you. Why don't you come on?
My name is Robin, and I am a survivor of domestic abuse. I was one of the ones who, years ago, did not know there was a way out, and I did it on my own. But sure, I would have left earlier had I known I had the support. Had I known I had the support, it would have saved me years of being hit, shot at, beaten, bruised. It would have saved me years of fear, and instead, I felt I had nowhere to go. When I found out that there is support through the Houston Area Women's Center, I'm like, you have to let these people know they're protected, they're safe, there is a way out. They do not have to stay in the violence. They don't have to stay where it gets to the point where they're shooting at you. You can leave, you can call someone, and they can help you. Had I known that I would have had that, I wouldn't have stayed for the 7 years that I did. It was a very hard time for me, but it's empowered me over on this end because I survived, I walked away, I lived, and I have a voice now for those who don't feel they have a voice. I can tell them that I've been there. I can tell them that I've been scared. I can tell them that you can have the support through this Houston Area Women's Center. So don't feel you're alone. Don't feel you have nowhere to go. Just pick up the phone and call, and they will be there. that would have saved a lot of years.
I think we'll close it up now. Thank you for coming, and we're available to answer any other questions offline. Thank you.
I'll see you back in 2 minutes.